Welcome to the Science of Action Design. My name is Eric Jacobus. I'm a stuntman, an actor, action designer. I'm also kind of a nerd. I do a lot of science and history research on the side. I have been a Comic-Con sort of participant for about 20 years now. I exhibited. I had a booth where we sold DVDs for years. And also, I've been on panels with Rick Myers, and so I have to thank Rick for always inviting me onto the panels. Thank you for the Comic-Con staff, and thank you for Adam Ecclesial, who has really helped with this research endeavor. Just a quick background on what I've done. I did a feature film in 2006 called Contour. Just a bunch of us guys got together and made a movie for $5,000. Wrote and directed and did the whole thing. Edited on the floor of my girlfriend's house every night when I was doing it. Did a film called Rope-a-Dope 2, among a bunch of other things too. Rope-a-Dope 2 was in a film festival here at Comic-Con back in 2014. I won, or 2015. I won, and I had to actually judge the festival the next year, which was super fun. Also, then I did a series called Tekken in Real Life, where I copied Tekken characters. Did this for like 30 different characters. It was this real kind of like, it was like an obsession. I don't even know why I was doing it, but then I kind of got my answer when Sony Santa Monica discovered me, and they said, why don't you come in and audition to be Kratos for God of War? And so I did. They told me that I moved like a video game character, which was weird. Went in and auditioned, and I ended up playing Magni, Modi, Baldur, Kratos, and a bunch of other NPCs in that game. I was doing the combat, not the acting. I get doubled for all of my acting scenes by Chris Judge. That's a joke. And then I did a couple other games. I did Mortal Kombat 11, did a bunch of characters in that. Demon Souls, did the main character for that, stunt coordinated it. Started a company called Super Alloy in Las Vegas. Our first game was God of War Ragnarok. If your first game is God of War Ragnarok, and we motion captured the gameplay at our studio, but we couldn't tell anybody for 3 years. So it's like we didn't even exist. Awesome game to do, amazing experience. We didn't exist for 3 years. It was really tough. I love doing action, I love movement, and I've sort of come up with a science, and it's kind of crazy. I hope it makes sense what I'm talking about. So here's some of the games we worked on. So I'm just going to give a quick background on how I got here. My childhood was very American. I grew up watching Arnold Schwarzenegger. I loved big movement and big explosions, right? Like big men doing big things, right? I thought that was really cool. I also loved big men doing kicking, right? Jean-Claude Van Damme, and it was a very kind of like American thing to have a very buff man doing kicks. He sort of like invented the kicking shape in American action cinema, by the way. Like he kind of has like the Marvel pose for kicking. And I watched my share of Bruce Lee, obviously, and Bruce Lee was like the only Hong Kong action that I really knew. I was in a small town in Northern California called Redding. We didn't really have any like Hong Kong action movies except Bruce Lee. But Bruce really invented the kicking shape. I have a video on my YouTube channel called, it's about Bruce Lee. I can't remember the title of it. But basically, I think that he's the one who basically created the kicking shape. And then Chuck Norris kind of created the kicking persona in America, I guess. He's this very stoic kind of American kicker, But I also loved vaudeville. And I loved vaudeville because vaudeville is just like theater, where you just kind of get to sit there and watch somebody move around. And that's so fascinating, especially when there's action involved, right? Because you just get to like appreciate the entire gag and see the entire performance kind of top to bottom. And so, being raised on vaudeville and American action cinema, I was sort of primed for when I would one day discover Jackie Chan, but that wouldn't happen for a while. My real plan was to become a particle physicist at a particle accelerator. That's what I wanted to do. I was doing calculus in high school. I wasn't very physical. You can see me here I'm this kid right here. I'm that one. I'm nutting myself on that bike. Not a very physical kid. Lifted weights that I could fall on the ground, but that was about it. Really just wanted to do science. But that all changed when I saw this movie. Can we dim the lights? What I love about this scene, and I'd never seen anything like this before, because you're just standing there watching what looks almost like a vaudeville movie, right? Like these guys are moving so quickly, you see the full body, you see the entire thing. It's like they're speaking a different language when they're moving like this. I realized that I needed a career change because I was so fascinated with this. Can I have the lights back up? I ended up getting obsessed with Hong Kong action films, and I ended up reviewing like what is that number? 241 action films, Hong Kong films. Back in like 1998, I'd go to Chinatown, and I'd bring them back. I'd bring back like a stack of video CDs from Chinatown, and I would just review the action. And nobody was really doing that back in the late 90s, and I was just obsessed with it. And I would list the stuntmen, I would detail the fights. I didn't even care about the story, right? So I did 240 of these action reviews. And sort of like started to understand like how to maybe make these things. And this is one of the pictures of one of the reviews. Can we just dim the lights a little bit more? At the time, in America in the late 90s, this was actually a really exciting time, right? Like we had The Matrix, Rush Hour. Chow Yun-fat was an action star in America. This is kind of crazy to think about. Michelle Yeoh was in a James Bond movie. Sammo Hung had martial law. The Matrix is a kung fu movie that's a massive budget. So this is like a really fun time. Jet Li became an action star in America, right? It was because all these Hong Kong guys were coming over from Hong Kong because of the Chinese handover. And so I started wondering, okay, if Hollywood's doing this, can a guy from Northern California make a Hong Kong style action film? So I took inspiration from skate videos at the time. A lot of my friends did skate videos, and I loved the fact that guys would go out and they'd make videos with a camcorder with a handle on it, right? And they would just like submit these things to Thrasher, and they'd get a gig. I thought, well, why can't we do that? Why can't we go and make action films and like send these things to Hollywood, do it Hong Kong style, do it like a skate video? So I did. I made a stunt team. I called it the Stunt People. And we made these super low budget. It was just us going out there with a camcorder and trying to replicate what we saw. Because we thought that if those skills were valued in Hollywood, then if we practiced those skills in the same kind of editing style that was coming into Hollywood with the Hong Kong style edit and the Hong Kong style camera that was being used. Remember at the end of episode 1, there's a very Hong Kong style fight with Darth Maul. And so we thought like those skills are gonna be very valuable. Okay, well then something happened in 2002. And Bourne Identity has a very different idea of how fight scenes should be shot. So what do you guys see when you see the Bourne action scene?
Too much shaky.
Shaky, close-ups.
1,000 cuts. Closer together, less.
Bits and pieces. It's very montagey, right? Now, I was a purist. I was a Hong Kong purist. I hated that. I absolutely hated that when I saw it. And I said, there's no reason that should be on the screen. But people were watching it. People were paying to watch that. And they made like 3 more of them. And then they kept making movies like that. Now, also, they were making the Matrix films at the same time. You still had Matrix 2 and 3, which is very much like the first Matrix in action style. They still did Star Wars films, which are kind of in that same kind of vein too. But this became the sort of trend, it seemed. Like this was the path of Hollywood action from at least for the next 10 years or so. And so the question became, well, are we wasting our time doing this Hong Kong style? Like, what should I do? Should I keep on doing this Hong Kong thing because it's not marketable anymore, unfortunately? Or should I just go and try my hand at just being a stuntman in Hollywood? So I decided, no, I'm gonna dig my heels into the ground. I'm just gonna try and perfect this thing. So I stuck with my craft. So I started making a lot of short films. I kept with the stunt people. The first thing I started doing with, the first sort of science that you learn with filmmaking and action design is psychology. Is basically how to convey something to the audience by using camera and editing. And you can sort of like do whatever you want with the performance. Like if you shoot it and edit it in a certain way, you can sort of tell any kind of story. That's what the Hong Kong filmmakers really realized, is they had this montage style filmmaking that was very compelling and it made a lot of sense. And so, I made this film called, like I mentioned, Contour. We have this fight at the end where we fight with our neckties. It was inspired by Jackie Chan's Who Am I? And there's a lot of editing in this, actually. Like we're doing about 8 moves per shot sometimes, but sometimes there's just like 1 or 2 moves in a shot, and so it's in order to sell a gag. And so, like the way that scene works is it actually doesn't make any sense. Like we didn't actually tie those things together in that way. Like we would sort of do very complicated things with our arms, and then we would cut to a tie having been made, right? It's actually a total lie. It's complete psychology. I could have shown any number of things. I could have shown. It could have ripped. It could have become. It could have become multiple ties. Who knows? We could have sold a bunch of gags. But that's the use of camera and editing and psychology. And you can sell whatever action that you want with that. And our goal was to show that these guys just become kind of like wrapped up with their own ties, right? Next thing I used with science was game theory, which is this sort of human sciences, which is a way to sort of understand how individual people act within a crowd. And so if you watch like a Bruce Lee action scene, Bruce will be surrounded by 15 guys, and he'll kick that guy, and he'll kick that guy, he'll back fist that guy, flying kick that guy, and he just sort of like does one move each. Donnie Yen kind of handles crowd control in this way, right? And I thought, like, well, what if you handled crowd control in a very realistic way, where you just pick on one guy, and you see how everybody else reacts? So this is from my 2012 movie, Death Grip. What I told the background actors was, okay, gradually back away and kind of lose interest in fighting, right? And that's kind of what you see in the next shot. It was the story I was trying to tell. Because nobody wants to be that one guy. At that point, everybody sort of decides, okay, it's not worth it for me to get involved in this. And so this is just like giving your NPC, crowd around you. The NPCs all have their own minds. Like they all actually have like AI, and you need to choreograph your crowd to act accordingly. I kind of ripped that off from a Korean movie called Attack the Gas Station, but we won't get into that. Okay, next time I started introducing more science, and I used something called Mimetic Theory that I was studying at the time. It sounds very woo-woo, but it's actually very simple. The idea is that the reason that humans escalate violence to the extremes, and the reason that a single gunshot, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand can lead to 20 million deaths in the world is something that's pretty unique to people, right? Like you don't really see chimpanzees fighting and then suddenly 20 million chimpanzees are dead. It doesn't really happen with any animals. It's only with people. We have this like predilection toward like, okay, if one punch is thrown, then the entire world could blow up. And this is this theory from René Girard called Mimetic Theory, and he had this idea of escalation to extremes where the natural tendency of people, let me back this up, the natural tendency of people is to escalate fights because we don't actually know what the violence of the other person is going to be. It's just we tend to escalate just naturally. And so Rope It Up 2 is a Groundhog Day type movie where whenever I get knocked out, I get to wake up and kind of like retry. It's just like that Tom Cruise movie, but we made it first. And so that's the story of Rope It Up 2. So first day I come and I see the bad guy, and this is, we've already had beef from the first movie, and so I'm kind of leery of him, right? But I decide, okay, I'll trust this guy, which is a mistake because he knocks me out. So then I wake up the next day. Wait, was that the first one? There we go, second one. So I wake up the next day and I realize, okay, well maybe I know what to expect now, right? So what are you going to do? You're going to block it and you're going to attack, right? But now the bad guy wakes up. So Rope It Up 2 has a second Groundhog Day loop with the bad guy. The bad guy wakes up, he brings a baseball bat, knocks me out. Then I wake up, I bring a 2x4, knock him out. He wakes up, he brings another guy. And it just kind of escalates like that. Yeah, you can watch Rope It Up 2 on YouTube, it's free. Okay, the big one was movement science. Now, the big opportunity, the big sort of like sea change in my understanding of action design was when I started working on God of War. God of War was incredibly hard for one reason. It's because I knew how to fight like a Hong Kong guy, right? Like when I would throw a punch, it would be like, bah, 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 and be very quick. It was very rhythmic. And actually the goal of sort of the Hong Kong style of fighting is to cooperate with your opponent, right? You sort of run into a spot and you cooperate with cool moves in the center and you sort of back away, right? And you kind of build this geometry. It's very beautiful. So when they told me to throw a punch in God of War as Kratos, I threw the punch and went, ha, like that. And they said, no, that's terrible. You can't do that. This is an American game. It has to have weight. It has to have a big anticipation. It has to have a big follow through. It has to have a bunch of character. I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And I had to relearn how to move. I had to actually move like an American, which was kind of an out of body, but in a body experience. Anyway, I did that for 2 years. Learned how to move in this very big new way, and it's not like a Hong Kong way. Like it's really hard to have a cooperative fight scene when you're fighting like Kratos. But anyway, did that for 2 years. Then I got another gig on Demon Souls, and so I walk into Demon Souls 2 years later, and they're like, "Hey, you're the mocap guy." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the mocap guy. I did Kratos. I know what I'm doing." And they're like, "Cool, throw a punch." And so I throw a Kratos punch, which is Kratos punch is like this. Like that, right? That's a Kratos punch. Did I literally break my mic? Test. I broke my mic. Kratos broke the mic. The cord? Is there a cord? There's no cord. Thank you. I'm going to be throwing another punch soon, so you'll need to get another one on standby. I don't know what I did. I threw the punch so hard I broke the mic. And so I did that punch that we just did. I'm not going to do it again. And the director, he's British, but he's working on a Japanese game, and he says, no, that's not going to work. That's terrible. You have to punch like a Japanese character, not an American character. And I was like, well, what the hell does that mean? And he said something like this. I'm going to try and paraphrase him. He says, don't worry about all that character leading into the movement. Just cut through the movement and then hold a cool pose. And then go back to idle, right? Because in gameplay, when you're playing as a character, you have a kind of character stance. You do your move, and you go back to a character stance when you hit attack. So I had to learn how to move in this kind of Japanese way, which is very different than the Kratos way, right? It's like I'm not really focusing too much on the build-up. I'm not really giving much character, except for the pose at the end needs to be very accented. And if you think of anime, that's kind of exactly what they do. Right? It's actually like they don't even care about the movement. You know, like in anime, they'll literally just like do this, and then he'll be holding a sword, and people go, what the hell just happened? And then a bunch of trees will fall down, right? And that's cool. So you're kind of like replaying the fight in your mind, going, like, oh, interesting. That's how he killed all those guys, right? Very different kind of movement. So I had learned 3 kinds of movement. I had learned a Hong Kong style, I had learned an American style, and I had learned a Japanese style. And in order for me to go, by the way, I was working on Demon Souls at the same time as God of War. So I would have to code switch. I'd have to actually translate. I'd have to like change my language when I would go back and do God of War. It was in the same building too, which made it even more complicated. And so I would have to make sure I'm not punching like Kratos in Demon Souls, make sure I'm not punching like the Demon Souls guy in God of War. I had to come up with a program, like this grammar, so that I could understand how to move in the right way. And I came up with something called the 5 stages of movement. You can see it on my YouTube channel, where every movement has 5 pieces to it. You have an in point, which is the beginning of the movement, right there. And then you have the antic, or the anticipation, which leads into the attack. You have the hitbox, which is the attack itself. Recovery is everything after the attack until you get back to the out point. So whenever I would do a move, if I did a move like this, for example, right? And the director said, okay, great, but okay, next time the idle, make sure your feet are 45 degrees. Double antic, make sure you do a longer antic. Translation needs to be 2 feet. Hitbox should be 45 degrees, not 30. Recovery should be a little sloppy with a dragon's tail, and then make sure you go back to idle with a really strong recovery. Okay, that's like 8 notes. But I can put each one of those 8 notes into one of those 5 buckets. So I've grammarized movement. So I know, okay, so he said 45 degrees at the feet. Okay, he had double antic, so that's going to be this. A little bit longer of the antic. Okay, 6 feet, so I'm going, or 2 meters is 6 feet, right? Hitbox is going to be at 45. So I'm like able to organize it now. It's like rational in my head. It's not just this emotional thing. I've turned violence into language. I could put a grammar to it. And it was so helpful. That's how I could get like the first take. So I started mapping the movement grammar onto these different styles of movement that I knew. The Hong Kong style has this very sort of snappy anticipation, a very precise hitbox, and very snappy recovery with like zero translation. You don't want to recover, near the opponent too much because you're not trying to displace him. You want to cooperate with him. So that had its own sort of language, its own grammar, right? The American style, very rounded, very sort of displacing, right? It's kind of like a wrecking ball, and a lot of character after the recovery. You can almost like punch through the guy. Harrison Ford, greatest American puncher in existence. He's just this like cannon blast. When he watches he just goes through people, and that's an American punch. And that's like an American language of movement. That's like an American language of violence. And then the Japanese style, very minimal antic, cut through the hitbox, don't even worry about it. It's just like Iaido, by the way. If you take Japanese sword, you don't think about like cutting fast, you just need the right angle. And then you hold it, and the reason you're holding it is to see if your opponent is still standing, right? To assess what's next. Japanese punch language. So that got me thinking. Does language influence violence, or does violence influence language? Because there's something that's very sort of similar between the Hong Kong style movement and Cantonese. There's something very similar about the American style movement and American English. There's something very similar about the Japanese style movement and the Japanese language. Fortunately, I took classes in all three of those. Yes, American English too. American English is very rounded. It's kind of interruptible too. Like in English, when we talk, we can just kind of interrupt each other and finish each other's sentences. Cantonese is kind of like that, but it's monosyllabic. Every character has its own word. And it's also rhythmic, right? It's got like 7 tones, depending on who you ask. So it kind of plays like a song. And it's also interruptible. And Japanese has a predicate at the end of the sentence. The verb is at the end. I'll just give an example, right? Like in English, if you were to say, I will kill you because you owe me money. Now, if I were to tell somebody that guy, once I said, I will kill you, he knows right away that I'm going to kill him. He's going to start running, right? He doesn't have to wait for a reason why, right? He's not going to wait. Yeah, so it's interruptible, right? In Cantonese,
我會殺你，因為你欠我錢。
我會殺你, which means I will kill you. 因為你欠我錢, which means like because you owe me money. It's the same thing. Like you can like in Cantonese, like, hey, she's going to kill me. I don't care why. You can interrupt there, right? The predicate's at the beginning. But in Japanese,
君は私に借金があるから、君を殺してやる。
as for you, me toward me, basically, something is owed. You, object marker, I will kill you. You have to wait until your debt collector is finished with this sentence. It's totally uninterruptible. This is proper Japanese. You could probably phrase this in a way that is interruptible, but you probably wouldn't want to. You want to make sure he stands there until you finish your sentence, right? And then the same thing is with negation. If you use in English, it says, I won't kill you because you owe me money, because you want to make sure you collect from the guy. And so, when you say, I won't kill you, okay, great, yeah, I'll just listen to the rest of the sentence. Thank you. Right? So you know right away that you're not going to get killed. Same with Cantonese.
我唔會殺你，因為你欠我錢。
我唔會殺你. Right there is the not. You know right away that you're not going to get killed when this guy's talking to you. But in Japanese, again,
借金があるからって殺したりしないよ。
you have to wait until the end of the sentence for nai. Nai, it means not. So you like even after he says like because you as for you the money that you owe me, killing not. Okay. So if you map that to movement, it's like end heavy, just like this kind of anime style of movement, just like the Demon Souls movement with the sword cut. It felt exactly the same. Anyway, it's an open question as to whether language causes that style of violence, or does violence cause that style of language? Open question. I don't think anybody's answered it. I don't think many people connect those things. All right, military science, I think, has a lot to. We can look at military science a lot to understand, action styles in movies. For example, I think one of the things that works so well about the episode 4 fight is that it's not really about the fight. There's not really choreography in this fight. It's all trash talk. And that's the beauty of European dueling, is that it's just this point, and you're just sort of trying to avoid this point. This is something that Ron Gilbert used in Monkey Island. He realized that sword fighting was all about insults, and so in his game, you actually pick insults. You don't even fight. You just pick the right insult, and that's how you know whether you're going to win. But this sort of style of movement is influenced by a real history of fencing dueling, right? This is not arbitrary. This is not an arbitrary style of movement. Another example would be a different example would be Japanese-style dueling, which is very different. One cut, and you're dead. And that's really the point of Japanese dueling in sword plays. You just want to do one cut. You don't really want to have to do more than one cut. It's going to mess up your blade. You get cut anywhere on the body 2 inches deep, you're probably going to die back then. And if you look again, look at how he moves. Toshiro Mifune on the left. He has less antic than the guy on the right. Right? The guy on the right anticipates too much. That's why he loses. Now, interestingly, American action also has a sort of form of this dueling, which is the gun duel. Also zero anticipation. Right? Very little anticipation, very end-heavy. It's actually very similar to the Japanese style of movement. So this is sort of an example of how language does not affect a movement style, right? Because this style of movement and this style of movement are very different, right? The gunslinger style of movement and the bar brawl style of movement are totally different, but both of those guys speak English. But here's the difference, is that the bar fight, this exists under a sort of framework of gunpowder, right? Like you don't have a bar fight unless you have this as a potential thing where if things get out of hand, this will happen, right? So if this frames the conversation, so to speak, then you're allowed to fight like this. I think that's what allows the American kind of boisterous wrecking ball style of action to exist, because it's framed by guns. It's framed by the Colt revolver. One of the most interesting examples of an action style is the kaiju style of movement. I guess it sort of started with Godzilla. It's sort of an extension of the military warship genre before World War II. After World War II, that genre takes a major turn because, when you get hit with a nuclear bomb, things get really serious. Godzilla becomes, this monster, it represents nuclear power, and it's a very emotional kind of action. Like the destruction of the city, the nuclear power that threatens everything at any given moment. Things are in slow motion, right? And it's very emotional. I don't think that you can arbitrarily have this, because if you look the same year in 1975 in Hong Kong with Inframan, it's a very different effect. Hong Kong did not have a nuclear bomb dropped on them. So they get to kind of stand around and fight and have a little bit more fun. It's much more about the stunts. It's much more about the complex choreography. It's much more operatic. But this one is not framed by a nuclear bomb. This one is. I'm going to go into anthropology, and this is where it gets really nerdy, so please bear with me. Spooky Encounters is a Sammo Hung movie that has some of the craziest action you'll ever see, because it involves possession, animal style movements, exorcism, and it's funny too. So when you look at that scene, and this one too is another example where you have this kind of system of animal martial arts in Hong Kong cinema that's extremely unique. There's no cinema in the world that does this. Japan has like a little bit of it, but really in Hong Kong it finds like its full fruition. So the guy on the right is doing tiger style. You can see it with his hands. The guy on the left is doing crane. You can see it with his hands. Right? Now watch the hand movements, see if you can see it. Right there, the little hand gesture and the hands there. So they're sort of embodying animal movements, right? Now, can you have the lights up, please? So the standard story goes that the reason that tiger crane martial arts came about, and when you combine tiger crane, you get what's called the system called Hung Gar or Hung Kun. Hung Kun uses tiger and crane martial arts. But the story goes that the people that learned tiger fist watched a tiger fight and sort of copied the tiger's movements. And the woman who learned how to fight like a crane would watch a crane peck at fish and whatnot. And so she would do the same thing with her hands. Okay, that's not possible. I'm sorry. I don't think that that's possible for two reasons. First of all, it's totally impractical. There's also a duck-style martial art, and it looks like a joke. And I don't think that they originally meant it to be that way, and here's why. Second reason. Every ancient civilization in the world, Africa, North America, South America, India, Australia, they all have animal totemism. They have these clans that have an animal god as their sort of, it's like a mascot. It really is like a mascot, and they sort of affiliate with this animal totem. And in the case of tiger crane, it could have been that there was a totem clan with a tiger totem. Now, the purpose of having a tiger totem is not to fight like a tiger, because tiger martial arts also has all these weapon forms that look nothing like tiger martial arts. They just are weapon forms derived from real military arts. What most likely happened was that the tiger movements were used for shamanism, for various ritualistic purposes. A lot of the time they were done for dances, as they were everywhere else in the world. So what I'm saying is that China is very much like everywhere else in the world. And so as an example of how you could get a tiger crane system, this is actually how you get animal combinations in other countries. In a system of in exogamy, for example, is that a tiger cannot marry a tiger. This is called an exogamous matrilineal society usually. A tiger could only marry a crane, perhaps, in this situation. Don't ask me why. This is their reasoning. And so a tiger would marry a crane, and if it's a matrilineal system, then the children would inherit the crane. Right? The children would all be cranes, and then they would marry more tigers, and they would have, and then eventually over time, you might just combine these two things into a tiger crane system. So the reason I say this, and I have a video essay on this on my YouTube channel also. The reason I say this is because the value of studying science and anthropology is you get to kind of cut through the nonsense. There's a lot of myth. There's a lot of myth in the world. There's a lot of myth in martial arts. There's a lot of myth in movies. There's a lot of myth in our own country. We have a lot of myth. The more you study history and science, the more you can sort of crack that and give another angle to it. And you can start seeing things that are under the hood. Okay, how's our time? Oh, good. We got 15 minutes. I'm going fast. Okay, we're going to do some application. We're going to look at how these things apply to different action scenes. Now, I picked out a bunch of elevator action for comparison. Oh, not the video game. What am I thinking? No, fight scenes in elevators. So the first one is from Total Recall. And what I want you to just pay attention to is look at the camera, watch the body movement, watch the acting, the anticipation, the hitbox, the recovery. Look at these things and see what you notice.
Big strikes.
A lot of big wind-ups. Lots of falling, lifting up, pushing.
Wrecking balls, kind of, huh? Yeah. So what'd you guys? Bar brawl. All right, let's watch Ip Man 3 now. Another elevator fight scene. Thoughts about that one?
Short arcs, quick sequences.
Precise, yeah.
It's mostly defensive.
You notice how he's protecting the woman also at the same time? Very masculine, isn't it? It's almost like kind of mythical the way that he's doing it, right? You couldn't do that kind of choreography of protecting a woman from strikes in the Total Recall fight. That's why they left her on the ground at the beginning. But Donnie Yen's like, no, I'm going to do the Hong Kong style. I can protect her using editing and cooperative choreography. All right, Japanese. This is from Sonatine, Beat Takeshi's movie in 1993. Now watch this guy on the ground and how he starts trying to draw a gun out. Thoughts on that one? Build up. There's sort of a shocking kind of feeling every time one of those gunshots goes off. There's an earlier scene too where they get into a gunfight in a restaurant. And they're just sitting there, and then people start dying and things start breaking, and Beat Takeshi just stands up and starts firing like this until it's over. This is sort of like Beat Takeshi's version of samurai combat with guns. So when I think about Bourne now, I have to sort of put on my American hat and ask, what were they trying to show when they do this stuff? They're trying to capture moments. They're showing character. Here's a moment. He has a pen stuck in his hand. He pulls the pen out. People remember that. You know, people remember these moments. They remember him sticking the pen in the guy's arm. They see the pen, right? The pen has blood on it. The kicking doesn't matter. People aren't watching this for the kicks. They're watching Bourne. They're watching to see what this guy is doing as a character. They're trying to understand what's in his head. In the editing and the camera work, yeah, they're a little bit confusing, but I think that's to sort of make you process it after the fact. After you watch a Bourne fight, it kind of hits you afterward what happened. I think that's the intention. You know, when I was a 20-year-old Hong Kong film fanatic, I hated that because I wanted to know in the moment what was happening. But I don't think that was the point. I think that they had their own sort of American kind of action code. And maybe there's some European stuff in here too, because there might be some French kind of influence in this as well. Where the point is not to show, the point is to convey. The point is to elicit emotions from you. And if you don't like that, you don't have to pay for it, but a lot of people do. A lot of people like that, right? So if I were to wrap this up, I would say that action design, it's not arbitrary. These choices are not made just randomly. Like, they don't flip a coin, they don't just randomly pick what they're going to do. These decisions have like real history behind them. The reason that somebody moves the way that they do, the reason that people shoot the way that they shoot. People shoot some ways because that's how they think, right? Like Neil Blomkamp's action films, I cannot for the life of me ever make a film like Neil Blomkamp. I can't shoot action like him. And I don't actually like it that much, but I kind of enjoy thinking like him for a minute. It's kind of scary to me. Like when you watch a Neil Blomkamp film, it's kind of like a horror film. And I'm very much about like, I see things and I want people to see it. And that's kind of like the Hong Kong, this is a very Hong Kong style apparently, at least for the Hong Kong martial art movies that I watch. But there's a lot of Hong Kong martial art movies that weren't like that. There's a lot of the wuxia films which are very montage heavy. They defy physics. There's the John Woo, that's a genre of movies. John Woo was highly influenced by American gangster films. And that's all ways that they convey how they think about violence. And those have and that's not arbitrary. Violence is a language. It is language because we do it. And because whenever you throw a punch, whenever you pull up a gun, if you were to pick up a coffee cup, you could pick that coffee cup up in 1,000 different ways. Different anticipations, different hitboxes, different ways of grabbing it. You might just go up and grab it, drink it, and put it down. You might come up to it, look at it, examine it, smell it, drink it. Okay, it's still good, back away. There's 1,000 ways that you can do that. This is not just movement, like this is language. And it can all be grammarized. And I think that, in whatever physical trade that we're in, like martial artists and stunts, I think it's important that we start like grammaticizing these things. And it also helps us as performers because then we know what the hell we're doing. And you can always contact me, and there's my phone number. So thank you. Do I have time to take questions? Right here.
So in the elevator scene, did you look at the Captain America Winter Soldier elevator fight scene, and what style was that?
Yeah, that's like the American style of action is sort of like the John Wick style now, right? I think that's like highly. It's so martial artsy now. I think because martial arts is so popular in America. Like, I mean, it's like one of the most popular things here in America is like UFC. I remember when I started making movies in 2001, nobody knew what the hell martial arts were. Like, martial arts was Chuck Norris when I started. And we were making a movie one time, and one guy came out, and my buddy said, "We're making a kung fu movie." And he was a mechanic, right? We're making this fight behind his building. And he's like, "Kung fu, like Chuck Norris?" He didn't know what we were talking about. But then 2 years later, that guy knew what a triangle choke was. So yeah, I think like Total Recall, if you were to remake that fight now, it would look like Captain America, because things just changed. It's not just like real violence that changes things. It's also just the influx of combat sports and whatnot into a country that is going to affect the sort of action code. Yes.
So in your analysis, Kurosawa being influenced Seven Samurai from American Western, you covered that.
Yeah, I think that's like such an interesting overlap because Kurosawa and really that Chambara style of action, it's almost exactly like gunslinger action. There's one difference, is that there's no ECU eyes. There's no extreme close-up on the eyes. So he has his own take on it, But I think that comes from a real place where, it wasn't long ago when they were fighting like that in Japan. It's only been a few hundred years, and that's not long. In America, it's been it's even more recent. Only 150 years ago or so, I think the last gun duel was played out. It was like 1880, I think. There were gun duels in the mid-1800s. They were trying to get rid of that stuff, but it was still happening. And that was more of the European style gun duel, where it's at like 10 paces, but like the Western style gun duel was still a thing as well. So it's very recent and it's raw. And so those action scenes were you could ask a guy who might have lived through one of those. And I think Kurosawa, you're not really going to have access to guys who's lived through samurai duels so much. Although, the Meiji Restoration was only, less than 100 years before Kurosawa was making movies. And so, it's possible that people like had real experience that you could draw from. But you compare that to like Hong Kong action. Well, the last real like duel to the death, like when was that in Chinese history? It's probably been a long time, especially in the north, where like near the government, near the capital, where they just clamped down on that stuff. The only real violence you could have is warfare. There was no dueling. You couldn't do that. In the South, you could, though. So the South has like the triad film. The triad film is much more like actual martial arts in the South. That's like your secret society enforcers that are like helping people on trade routes and stuff. Yes?
Of the three styles that you were talking about, which do you feel like is the hardest to teach someone? Like if you had an actor coming in and needed to learn, a fight scene, which one would be the hardest? And is it because of the movements or is it the camera?
I don't know. Who is this person? Yeah, but it depends on like how you want your action to play out. A lot of the Marvel stuff is heavily influenced by Hong Kong cinema, And I think that that's just because, again, the spillover effect of all these guys coming from, and some women too, coming from Hong Kong during the handover. And all the stuntmen and stunt women had to like relearn their skills in the late 90s to compete against these stunt performers because, oh my gosh, you ask anybody from that era and it was intimidating. So they really adopted a lot of the same styles, and so they sort of combine American and Hong Kong action now. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers is sort of like this American Hong Kong style of movement. Now, there is a case to be made, though, that there's this director, Isaac Florentine, and Isaac Florentine would shoot everything Hong Kong style. He said he was shooting it like an Italian spaghetti western, but he would do it Hong Kong style because in a Hong Kong style, you just sort of grab the shots that you need instead of having them play through the entire fight scene. So you just have them do 1 or 2 punches and you just shoot it the right way. Okay, cut, now we move on. And that's a sort of Hong Kong style. So for economy, if you want to do it economically, do it the Hong Kong way. If you need to get people onto an American film set, do not teach them Hong Kong style movement, teach them American. Yeah.
I'm curious how you convert your vision for the scene into the actual scene. Do you notate it? Do you storyboard it? Do you write a script practically?
If I could draw it, I would, but I'm a terrible artist. So I just sort of like memorize it over and over, and I just sort of like think through it. That's just how I do it. But I know that the guys like Larry Leong from Zero Gravity, one of the early indie action teams, he would do stick figures for everything. Carlos Pacina on Mortal Kombat would do stick figures for every fight scene. So it depends on what you're good at, whatever your gift is. Sometimes I'll write it out, but I'll just kind of like forget what I meant. For me, it's easy. I have a very visual, way of thinking, so that works best for me. Thanks, everyone.